Are you thinking about starting something new, perhaps starting a podcast and wondering how quickly it can be done or what it'll be like or what's required to do that? If you are, you're definitely going to want to do your research. But the fact is, even if you did all that you possibly could, you're still going to have surprises. That's why today we're going to talk about how I got started with my podcast. What's happening, podcasters? This is 1000 Podcasters, and I'm Brian Ensminger. I'm a podcaster and a podcast editor, and I want to see you be successful with your podcast. This podcast episode is part of a series for National Podcast Post Month, or NAPA Podmo, and it's also part of a 30-day challenge with David Hooper over at bigpodcast.com. Today we're going to talk about getting started, and I'm going to share with you my story, not because my story is amazing, but because my story is actually more normal than you might think. And this is partially in response to the series that I'm doing, and also because of a Facebook question that I saw. There was somebody in one of the groups that I'm part of that was sharing that her goal was to launch a podcast in 2019. And she was just frankly wondering, is it too late? As I'm recording this, we're in early November, and the question was, there's only a couple months left. Is it too late? And can it all be done? And maybe you're asking this question too. Because of that, I'm going to go ahead and share my story about how I got started with my podcast and some of the things that I've learned along the way. So as I was getting started, I will say that I spent a lot of time in the research phase before I really started moving forward, probably 6 months just mulling over the idea. But I'm going to kind of leave that part out, and I'm going to assume that if you're wanting to get started, you already have an idea in play. So this will take us back to early 2014. I was getting ready for my show. I had the idea. I was getting ready to start booking guests because I was going to do an interview show. I needed to get equipment, and I needed to start learning the ropes. And I didn't exactly know what to do, but I was listening to some great shows. I was picking up a lot of great information from people, different ideas about how to get started, about what was required, some stuff like that. And I had a lot of that. And I also had a purpose for my show. I knew why I was wanting to do it. Now, that purpose has kind of shifted and refined over the last 5+ years, but I had something to do, a purpose for my show. But what I didn't have was exactly what I needed to do and in what order in order to get launched. And it was at that time when I was getting ready to get started that one of the shows I was listening to offered a free course. This is a podcast that's no longer in production, but it was by a guy named Miran Barakat. He's in Israel. I listened to him for a couple of years until he stopped that show. But he offered a free course on launching a podcast. And because the price was right, because it was free, and because I knew that I needed to find one person to listen to help guide me through the process so I didn't get confused, I took that course. And I invested the time, I watched the videos, I learned what I needed to do, and for the most part, I followed his instructions. I got my artwork, I identified my ideal listener, or at least who I thought it was at the time. I wrote the show description and the titles. I knew what tools I needed that were available at the time. All of that stuff was there, and I followed his advice, and I was able to get started. Looking back, there are probably only two things about my launch that I would change. One was that prior to getting started with him, I took somebody else's advice on what microphone to get. And I would say that in general, the microphone doesn't really matter that much. It's really important to get started. However, in this case, the person that I listened to, that advice could have been a little bit better. And so I wish that I had listened to Moran's recommendation at the time. I didn't have it when I bought the microphone, but I wish that I had, because that would have changed things. And then also, there was one recommendation that he had about the tech setup that, looking back, I wish that I had done something different. But the fact is, I got started. And those technical things, those are fixable. Those aren't a problem. But I did the work, and I got started. Why am I sharing this with you? The first thing I want you to pick up from this is the importance of having a guide. The importance of having one person to listen to who can help guide you through the process, somebody who knows what they're doing and can help get you from beginning to end, so that you don't have multiple voices confusing you with different perspectives and different ideas and some stuff like that. Since I got my show launched, I'm now over 270 episodes in on that show, and I've launched this show. It's the second show. I also edit for 9 other podcasts besides my own, and I've met some great people, and even more people have provided additional guidance and community over the last 5+ years. People like Daniel J. Lewis and Chris Curran and Dave Jackson and David Hooper. In fact, these people are part of the reason that I'm still podcasting and still trying to get better, and part of the reason that I'm doing this this challenge, this daily podcast in November is because of these people. And frankly, some of them I've never even met in person, which takes me to the second thing I'd like you to pick up from my history in podcasting, and that is the importance of community. However, let's go back to that question. The question was, can you get started in less than 2 months? So for my show, once I started getting ready to launch in earnest, it was about 4 to 6 weeks from start to finish. So I would say, yes, you can absolutely do that. In fact, when I launched this show, it went from idea to launched in a day. Now, it wasn't a huge launch. I don't even have a big audience right now, but I got the show started in less than a day. It may not have been stellar, but it can be done. So if you're wondering, can I get a podcast launched before the end of the year? I would say if you've got 4 weeks, you probably have more than enough time to get it going and get it up there and get it running. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about some of the benefits of podcasting. I've kind of touched on that a little bit. This will be the Because of My Podcast story. If you'd like to hear that, make sure that you subscribe at toptieraudio.com/subscribe. That way you can get this delivered to your favorite podcast app whenever it's available. On that page, toptieraudio.com/subscribe, you'll find 3 big buttons, one for Apple, one for Google, and one for old-fashioned RSS. And you'll find me in most of the places you can find podcasts. So if you'd like to do that, toptieraudio.com/subscribe. If you'd like to connect with me personally, if you'd like to set up a consultation, if you'd like to talk to me about editing your show, toptieraudio.com is the place for all of that. Thanks again. Now go out there and make a great podcast.